Good evening. I'm Clayton Cheever. I'm the Assistant Director at the Thomas Crane Public Library in Quincy, Massachusetts. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you've been here many times, welcome back. As you can see, I am not currently in the library. These evening programs we've been hosting remotely for some time. I was in the library all day today, but I'm back at home this evening, and I hope you are all comfortable in your home, staying safe and healthy. We have a great program lined up tonight that Sean put together specifically for those of us around the world that are experiencing the corona pandemic and having to isolate in our homes, so that we can really just enjoy a beautiful side of Irish history and culture and celebrate some just beautiful sides of life. So I hope you enjoy us for a tour of Ireland tonight and so many of the wonderful delights that they have to offer us. We have a lot of other great programs happening as well, so I'll take a couple minutes just to tell you about them and then get out of the way so we can enjoy Sean's program. I think I'll get a couple technical details out of the way first. We do have people that are continually joining us as I speak. Sean, thank you for helping let them in. Sean and I are co-hosting this tonight, and I'll be watching while Sean is talking in a bit and letting people in. And if you have any technical difficulties during the program tonight, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. We also are going to be using the chat feature here for our communication with each other. So we've had issues with Zoom logging before, so we won't be, there's no cross chat that's gonna happen unless you're on our YouTube or Facebook pages. But here in Zoom and across the others, you can use the chat service to ask me questions. And when Sean is ready to answer questions, he will ask me if there's any, and I will review the channels and let him know what your questions are. So please send in your questions for Sean to me. And I will be sharing those with him. Let's see if there's any other technical details. I don't think so. If you have any questions about how it works, please reach out to me. For many of us, this is old hat and we've been doing this for some time, but I do know it may be new for you. So don't worry, and don't worry about feeling foolish for asking a question that seems obvious. I understand. I've been there. I've been new. Nothing is obvious the first time you're trying it. So let's make sure this is the best experience for you as possible. The other programs, the other thing I wanted to mention tonight is some other great programs that are happening this week. We have a course, a fourth in a series of courses happening tomorrow night in smartphone photography. Quincy resident, Quincy College professor, Hausneck resident, Ron Goodman has been presenting this course. We've had 3 so far, and you can go back and watch all of them on our YouTube channel. They're teaching people how they can make phenomenal photographs with your smartphone, your iPhone, your Android, or whatever you're carrying around in your pocket. It's really amazing when you look at the quality of photos that can be produced. I'll put in a special plug for that. If you look at the homepage of the library, thomascranelibrary.org, in the bottom left section, you'll see from our blogs section, and there's a piece about it that has some links to those past videos. We're also encouraging people who would like to watch those and take some of Ron's tips and get some feedback on their own photographs to submit their photographs for the class tomorrow night. We're collecting those photos so that Ron can give some feedback on those. So you can email them to me, or you can use the form online to do that. Wednesday night this week, we also have a great program with Del Case. It's if you like history, which I suspect if you're here and celebrating Ireland tonight, you may also be a history buff, and you like music, which is another thing in common with me. I'm sure many people who are joining us tonight. Professor Del Case will be presenting a 4-part series in the history of music, specifically looking at music in different categories and how it's evolved over the last several decades. I believe this first Wednesday, the topic is going to be protest music and looking at how music both has served as a form of protest and been part of social movements across the last several decades. So it should be wonderful. I promise you'll learn something new and hear music in a new way after attending those. I could go on, but you can obviously read the calendar on your own, and you'd like me to stop talking so Sean can take over. So I'm going to do just that. But the last thing I want to do is give thanks to the friends who make all these programs possible. The friends of the library normally run our bookstore and are membership based. Obviously, the bookstore is not something they've been able to do since we had to close everything in March. But they are still very supportive and are just an awesome organization. If you're personally a member of the Friends, I want to personally thank you. And if you're not yet a member of the Friends, I encourage you to go look at our website, thomascranelibrary.org/friends, where you can learn all about the Friends. And for as little as $10 a year, become an official friend yourself. They just do so much to support us, and I really am grateful. So that's my spiel. thank you for coming and joining us. It seems like everybody should be comfortable now. You should have something nice to drink, and I'm going to pass the spotlight on to Sean. Sean, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Clayton. So welcome everybody, and thanks, Clayton. You'll be keeping an eye. Clayton will be keeping an eye. So if you're having any difficulty or if something strange happens, send him a chat note, and he will sort it out. So what I'm going to do tonight is to try to do, I suppose, at one level, the impossible, to try to give you a sense of Irish history, going back and trying to put all of these issues of dance, music, art, comedy, whatever, into some kind of a perspective. And I've thrown in a bit of history as well. So it'll take about an hour, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. What I find is something like this, which is so overarching, will tend to generate a lot of questions. And if we take questions as we go along, we'll never get finished, or at least a lot of people who may have to leave after an hour won't get the full lecture. So that's the reason I won't be taking questions until the end. Also, Clayton will keep an eye on, because in a couple of minutes, I'll be going on to share a screen share. So what you'll be seeing is a PowerPoint presentation. There are a number of videos then that are embedded in that. So hopefully that will work out well. Usually does. We've had one or two hiccups, but again, let us know if there's some major issue. So my starting point on this, given that I'm approaching this in a lighthearted way today, from the point of view of, I suppose, entertainment, the issue, that the general issue that comes up, and a lot of people wonder, how come the Irish people are so known worldwide for, being, I suppose, friendly. They always have something to say. At a turn of a hat, people can sing a song, tell a joke. So people wonder, where does that all come from? And it's a legitimate question. And it basically comes from ancient Irish history. In ancient Irish history, under the Celtic peoples, hospitality was a core feature of society. And there were laws that guided the customs that developed around it. And people who were hospitalers, they were very high up on the pecking order within society. And every clan or every tribe had to treat it seriously, otherwise there were serious consequences. People who were traveling around the country were entitled to hospitality, which meant that they could knock on anybody's door, and provided they weren't an outlaw or a rogue of some description, the people would have to put them up for the night. And that also included entertainment around the fireside. That was the expectation. Also on the main roads, there were the equivalent of, I suppose today there would be bars or hotels. And we're going back thousands of years now. And again, the people who were in charge of those, the worst thing they could do would be to turn somebody away. You literally could be delicensed in today's terms if you did that. And again, people did not have to pay, because there was a great store put in having people, because there was only certain types of people who were free to travel around the countryside. So in terms of history, news, because as you know, there was no TV, no radio, no newspapers or whatever. So people traveling around the country were the greatest source of what was happening elsewhere. So they had to be catered for and looked after. And if you didn't do that, there were problems. And as I said, even from the basic unit, the family, people had to be prepared to tell a story, sing a song, dance, entertain. And the reality is that what we have today in terms of the way Irish people are perceived around the world, it all dates back to that. Somehow or another, we've managed to carry that tradition. The worst period, well, there was, I suppose, during the Viking raids, and then during the conquests from England. And I suppose the famine was the worst period, because the famine was the first time when people were forced essentially to barricade their homes. And so they could not welcome anybody, either for fear that they would pass on the disease to people coming in, or that they would get it from them. And we know a little bit about that today. So I'm going to start off now. I'm going to share the screen. And the first piece I'm going to show you is, it's a beautiful song. It was written a couple of 100 years ago. It's a love song. And it's about a young man who falls in love. And the young man is poor. He falls in love with the daughter of a rich landlord. Big problem. So he figured that if word got out that they were a couple, he was not going to be able to hold on to the relationship for very long. So he swore basically he wouldn't mention her name. He would keep it secret. So the song is called "For Ireland, I Won't Tell Her Name." It's a song that's sung by a beautiful band from the county Sligo, and they do it to the backdrop of a lot of beautiful scenery around Ireland. It's about 5 minutes long, so I'm going to start with that. I do that usually because there's always, you know, a couple of people who are late joining us, and that helps. So Clayton, here I go. Let's see if this works. I think it will.
So far, so good.
Okay, so whatever reason, the drop down menu goes from the bottom up to the top, and it hides all your options then at the top. So here we go. A little bit of Irish to begin with. Tá fáilte roith. That's Gaelic, and that means you're welcome. And that's just a map of Ireland as it is today. Ireland has been united as one island for about 400 million years. Socially and economically and politically, it's been divided for the last 100 years. Now I'm going to play that beautiful song by Dervish, and this sings it has got one of the nicest voices you're ever going to hear. So relax and enjoy.
There's a home by the white Avon Moor that was sweet for the broad and sea, and white rivers by the west wash ashore, while small rushes they wave to the breeze, where the green ivy clings round the door, and the birds sweetly sing on each tree. Oh, me darling, they're tuning their notes. Is that Aaron, me nose and like a sick man that longs farther down. I do long for the light of her smile, and I prepare my own guardian bone, whilst I'm waiting for her by the stile. Oh, I climb life through storm, through sunshine and rain, and I surely would mention my life for to shield her one moment from pain. For she been my comfort in life, now my comfort and joy she may be. She's my own, she is my promised wife. Yes, I am innocent guide. Ah, but when I will call her my own, and 'tis married, we both then will be like the king and the queen on their throne. We'll be living in sweet unity. Oh, till then I'll have a home of my own, and I'll have a nice family. Oh, 'tis then that our name will be known. But for Ireland, I won't tell her name. Thank you.
So that was a beautiful 6 minutes for you there. So I think now we probably have everybody. Well, we have one more person coming in. So before I get started, I'm going to again just give you a quick idea of what I'm going to go through. Ireland obviously has a lot of history, including a geological history, so I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to tell you about the first peoples who came to Ireland. We're going to go through the Ice Age, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, Christianity in Ireland, and up to recently, relatively recent modern times. I teach an Irish history course that is a chronological history of Ireland. It takes about 2 to 2.5 years to complete, and I do it in 4 weekly chunks. And at the very end of this, I will be introducing you to the next courses that I will be presenting in September. So we'll start at the beginning. Ancient Ireland. So in terms of the geological history of Ireland, the oldest rock in Ireland has been dated at 1.7 billion years, and it's up off the northwest coast, just off County Donegal. There may well be older rocks that haven't been discovered. A lot of old rock would have been melted, during lava storms and whatever. But this 1.7 billion years is the oldest one. To give you an idea of how Ireland was formed, first thing to know, the island of Ireland has not always been where it is today. And it started off as a number of different pieces. And essentially 2 chunks of land floated around the Earth's surface for millions of years, essentially before being welded together about 400 million years ago. The history of the Earth, people might, have issues with dates, but the reality appears to be that initially the Earth was gases, and liquid. There appears to have been some issue on the sun, which meant that the distance between the Earth and the sun was increased, and that allowed for cooling. So you then had a crust forming on the Earth, and over millions of years, that crust then began to form what we have today. Now, Ireland originally was in the southern hemisphere in two pieces. And to give you an idea, at one stage, Dublin and Belfast, which are 100 miles apart today, at one time they were about 3,000 miles apart. In terms of the old continents, over time, what tends to happen is because the land mass on the Earth is moving all of the time, not necessarily moving in the same direction all of the time. It depends on the what happens underneath. But every now and again, every maybe 300, 400, 500 million years, all the land mass comes together. And in the process of the land masses coming together, two pieces that were on two different continents were forged into one. And that's how Ireland began. So what happened then was, after all of the land masses came together, then they began to break up, and the seas that we now know as the Atlantic Ocean began to separate if you like, what's the American continent from the European continent. And there were a few the equivalent of little drops, little rocks left over or whatever when the two massive continents. And some of those little pieces turned out to be Ireland and England, Scotland and Wales. So the continental shelves parted, and that was when we had a united physical Ireland. And things then developed over the next few 100 million years. And I suppose the most important thing for us right now to look at is the ending of the last ice age, which was about 12 to 13,000 years ago in Ireland. To give you an idea of the movements of Ireland over the centuries, as I said, and the images here don't mean anything. We understand Ireland looks like that today, but it didn't look like that until relatively recent times, maybe a couple of 100 million years ago. So originally, as I said, Ireland was in two parts that were separated by thousands of miles. And then about 400 million years ago, they were welded together. The Earth was moving, and then about 300 million years ago, Ireland went over the equator and headed northeasterly to where it is today, and will continue. And literally in about 250 million years time, when the land masses are, if you like, the expectation is that the land masses will come together again. At that stage, Ireland will be up around where Newfoundland is today. This map here, again, it comes from a major study that was done in Ireland by the Irish Geological Survey, and have some wonderful maps in it. And by the way, anyone who wants a copy of this presentation can let me know, and you can have a look at it. And there's references to that report. And these are some of the maps. What I want you to focus on here is on the left-hand side, where it's showing about 480 million years ago. There are two little red pieces there on two different continents. The top part is Scotland and northwestern Ireland. And at the very bottom, you have what turned out to be England, Wales, and Southern Ireland. And about 450 million years ago, there was a bit of an offshoot headed towards the middle of the gap, if you like, between the two supercontinents. And eventually all those continents came together, and those two little red pieces got pushed together. There was another process then which created what's, the kind of a midland in Ireland, what we talk geologically about as a suture, and it, if you like, it effectively welded the two parts together. So I don't have time to go into that in detail, but again, something you can read about, and at some point or other, I will be going over that as a history class. Now, in terms of the history that we have today, when the last ice age came, and at one point ice was about 2 miles thick on Ireland. So you can imagine that anything that had been there before the last ice ages would have been wiped out. So in Ireland, we've only evidence of civilizations going back to 12,500 years ago. In the 11th century, there was a book written, it's called the Book of Invasions. It's got a number of other titles as well. It was written by monks. who used old manuscripts, as well as they brought people in and they recorded from the oral tradition. And this was the history of Ireland up to then. The major problem though with it is that at this stage the monks were trying to write a history of Ireland that they had to reconcile with the Old and New Testament. So the timescales from those had to be ones then that they used in Ireland. So because of that, a lot of people treat this as a work of fiction, although up to probably 300-400 years ago, everything that was in this was understood to be the real history of Ireland. And today the issue is how much of it can we really take as real history, and how do we separate out the kind of Christianized text, because we do know that there were certain parts were removed and not written in for various reasons. Same thing happened when St. Patrick was around. He brought a group of 9 people together to write the laws, the old laws of Ireland. But unfortunately, we only have the ones that passed muster in terms of Christian values. We're not sure what was left aside. We do know that severe editing was done. Now, going back then, the first people that arrived in Ireland after the Ice Age are what we talk about as hunter-gatherer people. And it's also thought that there had been people in Ireland before the last Ice Age. And a lot of people who were on land that was covered by ice would have shifted, south to where the warmer weather was. And then when the ice disappeared, people began to move back because everybody needed land. And with the ice disappearing, there was new land available. So the hunter-gatherers, and in the Irish National Heritage Park, you can get a sense of what the way they lived. There's reconstructions there from what geologists and various other scientists have been able to figure out, and anthropologists. When after the hunter-gatherers, we had the beginning of farming. And when the farmers came in, they brought in new religious beliefs. And we know that from all of these megalithic tombs that are around the countryside. These originate with the farming population that replaced the hunter-gatherers. We're still not sure if there was a period in which the hunter-gatherers, if you like, learned the methods of farming and adopted them, or whether new people came in and replaced the hunter-gatherers, or whether there was a period of time in which both came together and eventually hunter-gatherers adopted the farming method. We don't really have the answers to those. So the monuments are around the country, and we have this feature would have started about 6,000 years ago. And today we know because around the countryside we have about 1,200 of those megalithic monuments. Unfortunately, quite a number of ones would have been destroyed over the years, some of them for road making purposes, others for land clearances, but we still have 1,200, and that gives you a sense of how widespread the activities that people were. We know that there were different size ones. There were small ones, which would have been for maybe, somebody of importance, maybe at a local level. But then there were larger ones for people who were important at a provincial level or a national level. And also some of them would have served as places for religious as well as other ceremonial activities would have been carried out there. We know that in the tombs, there have been human remains discovered. There was a period when people were buried. There was a period when people were cremated. So it depends. We can date some of the activities, from identifying whether the remains were cremated or not. Also, grave goods were found. I suppose the most unique feature that we have is Newgrange, which was constructed about 5,200 years ago. That's in the Boyne Valley. That makes it older than Stonehenge and older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. And this was in the Stone Age in Ireland. So I'm going to...
Out of the mists of the Stone Age, this structure has stood since the dawn of recorded history. This rounded tomb, called Newgrange, has stood on the bend of Ireland's River Boyne for more than 5,000 years. It is massive, distinct, and very mysterious. The mound of earth covers a rock passageway, which leads to a central chamber where the ashes and bones of the dead were placed. Long thought to be just a tomb, in the late 1960s, archaeologists uncovered an amazing secret that shed new light on this ancient structure. On the winter solstice, the longest night and shortest day of the year, a shaft of light enters a perfectly positioned window and lights up the 60-foot corridor that leads to the basin of ancestral bones. An impressive feat of engineering, considering its Stone Age builders possessed only rudimentary technologies.
Is particularly important because it's been proven without doubt that it was very deliberately aligned to sunrise at the winter solstice.
Its facade is of white quartz, restored by archaeologists who believe the mound was originally covered in a smooth stone that reflected the light. The massive stones in the interior were perhaps pulled from the river. The builders probably moved the boulders into position by rolling them on logs. Archaeologists believe it took decades to construct Newgrange. And since life expectancy was short, only about 40 years, the project likely was handed down from generation to the next. Little is known about the Neolithic farming community that created this structure. Why they built it is still a mystery. Perhaps the mound was a place of worship. Historians admit they just don't know.
We know they were used as burial places, but we also think they would have been used as places for ritual gatherings, where a focus for community gatherings, place to honour the ancestors.
For more than 5,000 years, Newgrange has captured the rising sun of the winter solstice. It's a lasting monument to human ingenuity and to a desire as old as mankind. Even then, people strove to understand great forces of nature and to harness them, even if only for a brief moment in time.
So that's the front entrance. You can see there the doorway, and then there's the above the doorway. That's where the sun comes in and lights up the chamber on the winter solstice. If you want to be there to see all of that, you have to enter a lottery, and people's names get picked out. And obviously that's massively oversubscribed every year, but that's the only way that you can get there, is to take your chances, enter the lottery. So that's just another image of it. It's kind of kidney shaped. And as I said, it was built about 5,200 years ago by Stone Age farmers. Give you an idea of the size. It's 93 yards in diameter, and it's about 15 yards high. We're surrounded by 97 curbstones, some of which are richly decorated with, we're not too sure what. For a long time, people considered it to be megalithic art, but now people are looking, to using advanced computers, as well as advanced knowledge about the structure of the solar system to try to interpret what was actually left on those. The other thing to remember is that there's still in Ireland lots of places that have yet to be possibly discovered. Certainly there's a lot of them have yet to be excavated. So there's a lot still that we may find out about the past. So I'm going to introduce you to Irish art, because that helps to bring us on to the next period in Irish history, which would have been the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age in Ireland began about 2500 BC, about 4,500 years ago. There was also a lot of gold in Ireland. And in fact, some people believe that the origin of King Solomon's gold was from Ireland. So here is a beautiful gold lunula that was produced about 4,500 years ago. You'd have to go to the museums, obviously, to see it, but you can see how beautiful it is. We were fortunate that that escaped. All of the beautiful works that we have today were ones that people had to take great care that they didn't get taken by the Vikings or various other peoples at different stages, and take them away and melt them down. And manuscripts as well as ornaments generally were either buried into walls of, of castles. They were put into the bogs, were put into the ground, and we're still finding some of those. And what appears to have happened is that the people who buried them would have done so knowing that there was a raid coming, and that all of this stuff would have been taken by, say, for instance, the Vikings. So what appears to have happened is that they may have taken the people who had buried it, because no one ever came back to find it, and we're finding him now. So that's one beautiful piece. Here's the Gleninsheen collar, which is nearly 3,000 years old, and it's one of the great treasures of the Irish Bronze Age. That's about 12 inches across, and it was found in 1932 by a man out hunting. Obviously, for some reason, the earth had, opened up, and he found this and various other pieces there. In the Stone Age, the Iron Age, we have this Trabolgan stone head, a representation of a human face. That's thought to be somewhere in the Iron Age, which began around 500 BC in Ireland, and it came after the Bronze Age. Continuing throughout history, then around the 8th century AD, here's the famous Tara brooch, beautiful piece again. It was found near Tara in 1850. So again, we're lucky we have that. It's made of cast and gilt silver, elaborately decorated on both sides. The front is ornamented with a series of fine gold filigree panels depicting animal and abstract motifs that are separated by studs of glass, enamel, and amber. And then the back is flatter than the front, and the decoration is cast. Here's the beautiful Ardagh chalice. Again, we're fortunate that we have it. It's one of the greatest treasures of the early Irish church, and it's part of a hoard of objects found in the 19th century by a young man digging for potatoes. So again, somebody had taken this stuff out of a monastery, had buried it in the ground to save it from being taken away by the Vikings, probably. And it was there for 1,000 years. The bowl and foot of the chalice are made of spun silver. The outer side of the bowl is decorated with applied gold, silver, glass, amber, and enamel. And the underside of the foot is also highly decorated and contains a polished rock crystal at the center. That should give you some idea of how skilled the craftsmen were back then. That's a beautiful piece of work. There may not be anybody even today who could replicate that. Most of you are familiar with the Book of Kells, and there's other manuscripts as well that were highly decorated, that were illuminated. So the Book of Kells, it's known sometimes as the Book of Columba. It's an illuminated manuscript. It contains the 4 Gospels of the New Testament with various other texts and tables. It's thought that it was begun at one of the Columban monasteries. That's why it's called the Book of Columba. Columba was an Irish man from Northern Ireland who ended up starting off the monasteries in Scotland, in Iona. So it's thought that when the Vikings raided that part of Scotland, that the decision was made to bring the book of what's now known as the Book of Kells to Ireland, to a safer place to be completed. If you have a rainy day sometime and you want to find out a bit more about the Book of Kells, you can go online. I just give you a few tasters. The Book of Kells, again, very nearly didn't survive. It ended up in a pawn shop at one stage. So it has a it passed from hand to hand, from house. So as I said, we're lucky to have it, and that history is available to you. Now I'm going to go on because we started off with the issue of hospitality and the fact that Irish people are, dancers and singers and whatever. So I'm going to give you 2 examples here. One is of a cart dance that goes back to particularly to the 16th, 17th centuries. And then the brush dance would be kind of an exhibition type of dance today. To give you an idea about the history of dancing in Ireland and music, from the Book of Invasions and from the Annals of the Four Masters, we know, or we believe, or at least some of us believe, that around 1900 years BC, an event began in Ireland that we know today as the Tailteann Games. They were something which the the Greek Olympics were modeled on about 1,000 years later, and there were competitions at those in things like dance and music, as well as martial arts, and quite a lot of other things. You can read those up again on online. Just look up the Tailteann Games. So we'll have a look at the cart dance, some beautiful music and some great dancing from some great Irish kids.
Yeah, well, the tradition of cart dancing goes back a very, very long time. It goes back maybe to the 1800s. And the reason it came about, or why people danced in carts as distinct from any place else, and I'm sure they've danced in lots of places, but there were dance masters who went around the country from town to town, and they probably stayed locally with maybe neighbours or friends or whatever, and they needed to show off their steps at a big gathering. So I suppose at that time probably the biggest gathering you would have in a country town would be the fair day. And they would have came to town, and maybe not just one, maybe two or three of them or more, because Irish people were very anxious to learn to dance at the time, and they needed a bit of instruction, as dancers generally do, and those men would come to town to show how good they were, and the way they would go about it would be jump onto the bodies of the cart. So they would dance what was known as a single turn.
So a little bit of history about that. You might wonder why the dance masters needed to go around to the fairs on fair day and to market days to try to get work. Well, what happened was at the beginning of the 17th century, when the old Irish Gaelic Celtic society was destroyed, and when the event we know today as the Flight of the Earls, it happened in 1607, and I'll be coming back to that a little bit, but that represented the defeat of all the old Irish clans. Now the Irish clans, all of the big houses would have had harpists and dancers essentially on their staff. So with the ending of the great Irish society, the harpists and the dancers and various other people basically had to take to the streets and go looking for work. So harpists and dance masters would have had to go to the fairs to try to recruit students so that they can continue with the skills that they had. So that's just a little bit of history. Now I'm going to show you what people are up to today, just for a bit of fun. And this is an exhibition dance called the brush dance. So you can see people having fun. So let me tell you about in the 12th century, when the Normans invaded Ireland, they sent somebody over to do a report. And one of the conclusions of the report, it was an assessment of the Irish. And the assessment essentially boiled down to the fact that from his point of view, all the Irish wanted to do was to enjoy life. And of course, that was not the point of the Norman invasion. So that's another day's work to explain all of that. But you can see there, people enjoyed themselves still today, even though that was something that was attempted to be rooted out of Irish society forever. It didn't succeed. So now I mentioned the Celts earlier on. I'm going to talk about the Milesians. There were various groups of Celts that came to Ireland. The Milesians, we don't know them, if you like, as the Gaelic Celts, the origin of the Gaels in Ireland. So let's have a look. So Mila Spania. So again, Miles is the name. He was the king of Spain. They had a history going back. If you look at the Book of Invasions, they talk about them having originated in Egypt and eventually arriving in Spain, taking over Spain and northern Portugal. And there had been, at some point or other, some kind of message that they believed in, that they needed to go to a part of the world that had known no stain or no sin, which was Ireland. So anyway, they came, and they came in 1699 BC, a long time ago. There were originally, I think, 7 or 8 sons of Miles, including his wife. They came. They first of all sent a group over to have a look at Ireland, and they came anyway. They ended up meeting the leaders of Ireland at the time, and when they were leaving, the Irish who were there at the time, the leaders, they got suspicious of them. So after they left, they sent a group of soldiers after them to stop them, because they believed that maybe they were really a threat, and they were. So they killed quite a few of them, but not all of them. So when the survivors returned to Spain, well, then they had a council, and they decided, well, we have to avenge the ones that they have killed, even though the likelihood is that they had planned on invading, anyway. So in the invasion, Scotia was the wife of the king of Spain. So she was killed in a battle, and the Irish that were here at the time, their leader was Queen Eru. So those 2 queens died on the battlefield. Scotia is, Julius Caesar referred to Ireland as the land of the Scoties. And one of the translations of that were in, that there were invaders from the island. And of course, when Scotland became a country and adopted a name, it adopted the name Scotland, which again is a reference to Scotia. The other queen who died in the field that day was Eru, and from her comes the name of Ireland. From Éire comes from her. Éire, which was the name that Emma de Valera gave to Ireland in the Constitution in 1937, and then everybody knows Éireann. So they had 2 of the women. There's a number of other women as well who gave their names, to Ireland. But anyway, in the end, they came over. Not only did she die, but quite a number of other of the sons died. The remaining ones that had family were Heber and Herman, and they ended up then splitting Ireland between them. So they continued then basically for 3,000 years. They ruled as a monarchy, and that monarchy then began to be dismantled after the invasion by the Anglo-Normans in the 12th century. And the effective end then, after another 400 years of the Gaelic Ireland based on Milesian descent, if you like, it officially ended in 1607 with the flight of the remaining leaders. They would have been the O'Neills, the O'Donnells, the Maguires, and the leaders of some of the other clans who were still holding out against England. They had been called to a meeting in London, which they knew that if they went, it wasn't going to end up well. So they headed off to Spain, hoping that they could recruit an army to come back and take back Ireland. Unfortunately for them and for us all, as they were heading out to the sea, Spain and England made a treaty. The end result of that was that they were not allowed to go to Spain. And so the hope for invasion of Ireland never happened. So the flight then was commemorated earlier, in 2007, which was the 400th anniversary of the flight. It was a small little village called Rathmullen, and as I said, they never got there, so they ended up they made a way to Rome, and a lot of them were buried in Rome. Quite a number of them were assassinated in various parts of Europe by spies sent from England. So it did not end well. So here is the commemorative sculpture then that was unveiled in 2007. Also, at the same time, there was a stamp that was issued by the National Postal Service. And for those of you who are interested in Irish set dance, there's also a set dance that was made that year called The Flight of the Earls. So I'm going to move on to a little bit of comedy. Now, as you can imagine, a major issue with comedy at any stage is trying to find somebody that you can present. But we're fortunate that we have a family comedian of great ability called Brendan Grace. He died last year. Brendan had a pub down just outside of West Palm in Florida. And he used to be a regular feature here. And maybe some of you even saw him. So he was known as Amazing Grace or Amusing Grace. He had a great way with words. There's a photograph of him as a young man with Frank Sinatra. So again, he had his philosophy and his understanding of Ireland, and this was his take. I think we were oppressed for so long that we just had to see the funny side of things. If we had been dour, we would have been a very depressed nation. We have a great sense of humor for that reason, and also Irish people are naturally funny. That's why we have produced so many great playwrights over the decades. So I'm going to give you a couple, here, a couple of short ones. If you go online, you can pick up a few more for free on YouTube. You can obviously get some of his DVDs and CDs. So these are about getting old.
Here's a couple of signs of old age. If any of these apply to any of you, you could be on the way out. You know you're getting old when your family talk about you in front of you. And then you learn the difference between a house and a home. It's the truth. A home is where they'll put you when they get you out of the house. It's true, it's staring us in the face. My eldest daughter came to me recently and she wanted to borrow against the will. And then she tried to convince me it was a short-term loan. Noel, when you wake up in the morning and your toes outnumber your teeth, then you know you're in trouble. You know you're getting old when yourself and your teeth don't sleep together anymore. When you wake up in the morning and that smile at your bedside is not the person with whom you went to bed. It's your teeth in a jam jar.
Now we'll try another one. That was a short one. Here's another piece of wit. This time we don't see him, we just see a cover of his album.
Well, it really is a great joy to be here in the beautiful Gaiety Theatre once again. And by the way, just so you'll know this, and I feel I'm among friends here tonight, I'm telling you something now. You're looking at a man who is now officially in the male menopause. And I couldn't give a I've got to the stage now in my life that nothing like that worries me or phases me in any way, because I'm able to deal with it. And I was looking at you, by the way, a lot of you guys tonight who's earlier on through the closed circuit television, and there's a lot of you here and you're only that much away from it. And then there's a good few of you in fairness and you've nothing to worry about. Because you have it well behind you. Oh, yes. And it doesn't come back. You get it once, you deal with it, and that's the way it is. But it's no harm. There are signs, by the way. There are signs of the male menopause to let you know it's on the way. And here's the main one. It's when you go out to paint the town red and you're home in bed asleep before the paint dries. That's how you know you're in the male menopause. And nowadays, ladies and gentlemen, I live over in America now, and on my last birthday, I became a senior. How about that? As senior, I became my last birthday. No, not here. I'm not a senior here in Ireland. I'm only a senior over there because they have a different system with the age than we have. They get older quicker. I don't want you to think like that I have the free travel or anything like that. I'm still a long way from the free travel. But the whole thing about it is, ladies and gentlemen, it's all to do with the way you accept it. I joined a seniors club in America, going back a little while ago, and I had to go to one of the functions recently, and it was a seniors disco. Oh, merciful Everton. Have you seen the state of them? We're coming into the disco. They were dancing on the way in. It was ridiculous. At one stage of the evening, I was having for myself a gin and tonic. And at one stage of the evening, I put my glass on the counter. I turned around to the missus, and I turned back, and someone was out there putting their teeth in the glass. It was ridiculous. And it's not only in America, even here in Ireland, I have to say to you, for many years, like I'm sure many of you here tonight, I'm a blood donor, and I'm sure you are, and good luck to you. And I went to give a pint of blood there recently, and I nearly died. You know, I went down to them to give the pint of... Do you know what they told me? This is the truth. They told me that my type was discontinued. So I'm in a dilemma now, you see. I can neither give it nor get it. In more ways than one.
So that's Brendan. As I said, you can go online and get a bit more of his work. If you get a chance to listen to The Astronaut, it's very good. So I'm going to have a look now at another period in Irish history to try to possibly help you to understand how come there's so many Irish people in the United States. How come the Irish diaspora is so big around the world? Literally 80 to 100 million people around the world claim descent from Ireland, a country that had at its highest point in the early 1840s, 8 million people. So again, the issue during the 1840s, and it comes up in the way it's dealt with. Some people call it a famine, some people call it a great hunger. The issue is that during that period, there was no shortage of food. There was lots of food in Ireland, and there was no need for so many people to die. The problem was the food was being taken out of the country. At the time, you had a combination in power in England that was made up of providentialists, who basically were people who believed that this was God's will, and so you should not try to do anything about it. That the fact that Irish people were dying was God's judgment on Irish people. If that wasn't bad enough, on the other side, then we had the Manchester School of Economics that came out with the first laissez-faire ideology. So at an economic level, which influenced the political, they were saying, well, we can't interfere, the market will sort it out. So with one crowd saying that we can't be, and there was a huge issue about giving food that was being donated. They didn't want to give that out because, again, that was going to interfere with the market. Then you had the other saying, well, they're dying because they deserve to die. This kind of nonsense. Then you had, you've all heard the song, The Fields of Athenry. And that's, again, a song about a typical young man of his time, realizing that his family were going to starve to death, went out to do something about it, which was to try to get some of that food. And of course, if you were caught doing that, you could be killed, as some were. If you were caught, you were going to be transported. And at this stage, they were sending people to Australia. By this stage, they'd stopped sending Irish people to the Caribbean and to the colonies on the, you know, the American side, they were sending them further and further away. So 1847 was the worst year. We know it as the Black 47. Now, there had been a famine 100 years before that, over the winter of 1739, 1740. We had what's known in Western Europe as a frost, a Siberian winter. Now, this was so cold that the ground froze to a depth of about a foot. So anyone who would, and at the time the practice was to dig, you know, the potatoes into the ground, and they normally would survive, but with this they were all lost. Also, animals, you know, died because there was nothing was growing. Fortunately, it only lasted one winter, and then it was gone. But it did wipe out proportionately more people than during the 1850s. But again, the population was much smaller. So we know the outcomes of the famine, the Great Hunger, millions of Irish dead, and emigration then was now rooted as the solution to all of England's Irish problem. At that stage, if you take the size of the population on the island of Britain, which was now Great Britain, you had about 12 million, and Ireland was 8 million. So again, the people on the island of Britain were fearful that the Irish would come in great numbers. There were plans during the 1830s to send 3 million Irish people off to Western Canada to set up an Irish colony out there. Never materialized. The worst group that was affected during the famine was what's known as the cottager class. They were obliterated. They were the people who were essentially working on short-term leases, 9-10-month leases on land that was, well, you had to work very hard to get anything out of it, let's put it that way. So they were obliterated. They were also the people who spoke the Irish language, because these were people who were situated on the west and the southwest of Ireland. So the population then continued to decline for over 100 years. The population didn't increase in Ireland until the 1990s. The issue in terms of rural Ireland, continued and continues to today. We can see it in just simply, you probably all know, most people want to get to the greater Dublin area because the rural parts of the country have never been properly developed. Part of the reason for that was that the land was used for grazing, not for growing crops, and you needed very, very few people. And that was the big issue during the famine, because the land, there was about 10,000 landowners at the time who had between maybe 10,000 and 100,000 acres, and they wanted Irish people off the land so that they could then bring in lots of cattle and sheep, and you only needed a small fraction of people for that. For hundreds of years before that, the main way that wealth was created by the landowning class was to rent the land out at exorbitant rents to Irish people. But now they could make more money by getting rid of the people. So there are lots of people who kind of wonder, was this period one that if you like, the explanation for why so many people died and for why so little was done, was it to facilitate the departure of Irish people from the land? Because that's what happened. The loss to the to the Irish language was severe, and the process then was on completing the process of Anglicization, and obviously the language was part of that. Give you an idea then, so 7 million people emigrated from Ireland in the 300 years before 1919. Tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, were sold off primarily during the 1650s after the Cromwellian settlement, because the land in Ireland had been used. What Oliver Cromwell had done was he had sold, to fund his civil war, first of all in England, and then to fund the takeover of Ireland. He had issued bonds which were repayable in land in Ireland. So when he won the English Civil War, he sent his army over to clear the place so that he could give the land to the people who had the bonds. So Again, I go into this in much more detail when I get around to that topic, but that gives you an idea why today the Irish diaspora around the world is almost 100 million people. To give you an idea about, I'm going to talk a little bit about rebellion. We know that from the very beginning, from the 1160s, 1170s, that the Irish people rebelled, and that rebellion kept going for 800 years. You know, from 1169. It was 750 years up to the time of 1916. So that was a continuous process, generation after generation, refusing to bow to the Queen and King and looking for freedom. Now, by the 1830s, at this stage, 1830, the English had been in for what, 600-700 years. They had managed to replace Irish law with English law. They had managed to impose a political structure, but they still had not been able to get the Irish people to accept their way. So people were rebelling. So their solution at the beginning of the 19th century was to introduce a national school system. They wanted to take people away from their influencers, who were their parents and their grandparents, who were teaching them Irish history, who were teaching them about the old Irish ways, who were teaching them Irish songs, and crucially, were teaching them the Irish language. So the schools were set up so that no child would be taught Irish in the schools. History would be English history. And this is an example of what kids had to hear and listen to. On the east of Ireland is England, where the Queen lives. Many people who live in Ireland were born in England. And we speak the same language and are called one nation. Now, what an insult to any Irish person that was. Worse still, the children that were taught to recite this little ditty. I thank the goodness and the grace which on my birth has smiled and made me in these Christian days a happy English child. So you can imagine hearing your kids, you know, say that. That would be enough to incite any man to go out and do something. So from the time then, as I said, that the people from England started invading, almost every generation carried on a tradition of fighting to regain national rights and to recover the land that was confiscated. And it did. It took 750 years for the Irish people then to regain control of 3/4 of Ireland. The country is still partitioned, as I showed you and at the very beginning. There's still Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom. So I'm going to play that song for you now, The Fields of Athenry. As I said earlier on, the origin of this is in the Great Hunger, and with the efforts of young men to try to, and possibly some not so young men, who would go out and try to ensure that their families would survive.
By a lonely prison wall, I heard a young girl calling, Michael, they have taken you away, for you stole Trevelyan's corn, so the young might see the morn. Now a prison ship lies waiting in the bay. Low lie the fields of Athenry, where once we watched the small free birds fly. Our love was on the wing, we had dreams and songs to sing. It's so lonely round the
that was a beautiful version there by Paddy Riley. And for a lot of people, that's the Fields of Athenry is kind of like unofficial. So I'm going to finish up here with just a little bit about the classes that I have, my online history classes using Zoom. That'll be starting next month on the 10th of September. That's my email address. I don't have a web page yet. I'm working on it. So on the Thursday nights, I'm going to be doing 2 courses. I have 2, if you like, types of classes. One is a history of each county in Ireland. And in September, I'll be doing County Tipperary. And then in the other course I do is the chronological history of Ireland. So I've already done the kind of geological origins of Ireland and the Celts. So I'm up now to and I'll be starting in September with the arrival of Christianity and explain the role of St. Patrick. So if you're interested in those, again, you could contact me at my email address, or you could probably contact the library. Also, as I said earlier, if you would like to have a copy of this, all I need is your email address. But I'll be sending a copy of this presentation to Clayton, so he will be able to send it on to you. So I'm going to take some questions now, and then at the end I will finish off with a piece from Galway City. It was the biggest group outdoor singing and playing of the great song, The Galway Girl. So I'll show you that at the very end as you're leaving, but I'll go in now and take some questions. So where's all the brave people?
So Sean, while people are composing their thoughts, I'll ask you a question. So
Sure.
I wonder if you have suggestions about places. Obviously, if you're looking for new books, there's lots of places where you can find books, and I think people are probably pretty well versed at looking for history books. And one of the earlier programs, you gave us a great bibliography of some places to get started with the history of Ireland. But if you're looking for new musicians, if you're looking for more examples of dance, sometimes it's a little harder. Are there YouTube channels? Are there, do you subscribe to Irish television? How do you learn about people that are doing fun, creative things today that you can then start pulling the threads and go back to their influences and find out and learn more?
Sure. Well, you've got a combination of things. You've got dance and music schools. So if you want to, to say just simply put something like that into a browser, Irish dance classes, Irish music classes, there's lots to choose from. Also then, lots of people will post things and lots of people will have their own YouTube channel. So you can put in something like, if you want to look at, Irish, set dance or Irish step dance or Irish shanos, the old style dancing, which is what I showed you earlier on, or even if you want to put something in like, cart dancing or brush dancing, you're going to get a lot of, hits on that. So you can just play around with a browser and just move from one site to the other. There's lots of material there. On the presentation that I have, on the bottom, you will see the references, that I've used. One of the innovations that's there in parts of the country is that young people are using dance as a way to show you the beautiful scenery around them. So you've got some wonderful dancing videos where kids, are dancing on mountains so that you can see the countryside, around. So they're up on the top on a rock on top of the mountain. In other situations, kids are dancing, in the water at beaches. So they're getting creative about how to show you their dance, while at the same time taking it away from the stage and the scenery that you would normally associate with dancing, and it's wonderful to see it being done. And I have some of those. I wasn't able to show the whole presentation tonight, so I have one of those videos attached, to this presentation, so anyone who gets it can have a look at that. I've won, there's an international, dance festival every year, and Irish kids participate in that. So you could also look up on international Irish, international dance and look for Irish participants or something like that. But
That international element brings up, you mentioned and made reference to the millions of people of Irish descent around the world, the greater Irish diaspora, and there's been some great contributions of Irish culture to collaborative elements from other cultures. I'm thinking like the Afro-Celt sound system and some of the merger of Irish rhythms and some African rhythms to create something brand new. I don't know if you have any favorites from the greater Irish diaspora that you'd like to encourage people to check out. Any favorites of your own?
Well, I mean, you have say the Afro-Celt sound system, but then you've got say the the great Irish band, the Chieftains. They have an album made in China, an album made in Cuba. There's collaborations that they've done around the world, so you can get some wonderful multicultural input. Just on Chieftains material alone, and the Chieftains are probably the most famous traditional Irish band. They've been going now for over 50 years. They're phenomenal. They're still touring, in fact. It's all there to be found. And then you have some Irish bands like Danu, again called after the people of Dadonan, one of the original peoples who came to Ireland. So you've got combinations, of things as well, where history is incorporated. You had, I mentioned the Book of Invasions. An Irish band called the Hardships did a CD years ago called the Book of Invasions. So it was based upon that historical record that we have. So you've got a lot of things to search through.
Another question was, so referencing some of the jewelry that you showed, and you had some photos of some of the ancient jewelry, where would people go? Where would you recommend people to turn to learn for more about some of that ancient craftsmanship, specifically the jewelry? I was amazed that I assume all that gold and silver was also mined in Ireland, or was it from some? Yeah,
it was mined. There was a huge amount mined, in Ireland, to the extent that today there's very little. And as I said, one point, there are those who believe that the origin of King Solomon's gold was in Ireland. So there's just but we know that there was a lot of gold, and we also know that about 1200 BC, that there were people, there were Celts, possibly some of them from Ireland, who were mining on in this continent here. 1200 BC. There's still, mines here that were emptied, copper mines, for instance, that were emptied here 1200 BC. Whether it was done in collaboration with the native peoples, or whether it was, how they would have known there was copper there, I don't know. But certainly, we know anyway, that the whole concept of discovery is just kind of a forgery. I mean, the doctrine of discovery, is a nonsense, because we're people living here. There's 100 million people, on the American continent before you arrived. And also we know that Irish people, the Vikings, Egyptians, people from all over the world had been here, over the last few thousand years. So the discovery by Columbus is just kind of a myth.
So there's a couple of questions. One on what you're talking about there, and if you'd like to say a little bit more about Irish discoveries or points of contact with what's been called the New World, and then some concern about the protected status, whether or not there is a protected status for some of the ancient buildings of Ireland. You mentioned that many have not fully been discovered, likely, and that there's still a lot of discovery to be done. So it's a two-part question, and from a couple different people. One about, the history of Irish discovering other lands, and then the protected status and discovery of Irish lands today.
Oh yeah, I mean, take a simple example. I mean, I was over in Barbados there last year, and so again, there's talk about, there used to be a hospital there on Barbados. It was named after Saint Brendan. Now, Saint Brendan was, an Irish navigator who headed off around the 5th century, AD. what we know from what was written about him, that he was going on knowledge that he had of people having traveled, before. So this kind of idea that, first of all, the kind of flat earth theory that somewhere out there you want to fall off a cliff, that's a load of nonsense. People knew that out there, and people used to kind of island hop. They would go to, to Iceland, Greenland, over, and that way. Now, at some stage, obviously, somebody, and maybe Brendan did. How we still don't know how he ended up, or even possibly to some extent, if he ended up on not Barbados, the British Island in the ocean. What's it called? It's down around,
St. Thomas, perhaps, or
it's down, like it's a place that people go from Boston, because it's only a couple of hours from Boston.
Bermuda?
Bermuda, yeah. Yeah, so St. Brendan is said to have been to Bermuda. And again, when the Vikings got to Iceland and Greenland, they were very surprised to find Irish people there. And of course, the story with Greenland is fascinating, because it was one of the great marketing achievements ever. Because how are you going to get people to go to this barren place that's frozen? Well, they went back. The Vikings went back to their own country, and they persuaded people that this was green and luscious, and they called it Greenland. And everybody went out on one-way tickets. So it was a master stroke in early marketing, if you like, to call the place Greenland. But the Irish would have participated, and the Celts, because remember, a couple of thousand years ago, the only safe way to go anywhere was by sea. People didn't go overland. You wouldn't go a couple of thousand miles. It didn't make any sense. You would use the sea. You'd only go inland if there were, rivers and lakes to support that kind of activity. And the forests were dangerous places. At least on the ocean, you were in a big ship, and if a shark came at you, you had some protection. But there were dangerous things, even in Ireland, in the woods, going back a few thousand years ago. And one of the reasons why, if you like, I talked earlier on about the custom of hospitality. Well, one of the reasons was for safety. You couldn't leave people out, at night, because it wasn't safe. So again, there was reasons why people had to be hospitable.
So what about the protected status of Irish buildings and Irish history today?
Yeah. Fortunately, we've lost a number of them, particularly at the early road building stages, because anywhere where there was a pile of rocks, they just went for it. It was easier. So fortunately, at Newgrange, because they did go to Newgrange and started to use it as a place for road building, for road building materials. But somebody realized how important it was and managed to get it stopped. But we know that around the country, quite a number of places were totally destroyed for road building purposes. But today, most things, would have protected status, but to some extent, you can really only get protected status if you can identify something as something. You can't kind of say, well, there's a shape over there and it looks like this might be something that was constructed by people. It's got that kind of, symmetrical shape. So maybe in the body of this, there's some treasures. You wouldn't be able to get, something like that protected. But again, most people now, in Ireland would be totally opposed to destruction of any kind of historic buildings. The only thing that, if you like, that people had no problem with being destroyed were obvious symbols, to British rule in Ireland, like blowing up Nelson's Pillar and various other monstrosities, if you like. But apart from, Georgian buildings, Elizabethan, whatever, anything that's there, even though they're related, in one sense to, to period, of English history, but they're there and they're protected. In the 60s, the students had to come out to ensure that happened, because there was, there were developers who wanted to knock down all these Georgian buildings and build these horrific looking structures that we have in Dublin that go back to the 60s. If you're ever in Dublin, go to Liberty Hall. Liberty Hall is probably the prime example of something horrific in terms of architectural and aesthetic. I won't say beauty, because there's nothing beautiful about it.
I'm not familiar, but I can only imagine it's in the brutalist tradition.
Just glass.
Oh, okay.
Lots of glass.
Doesn't take much thought to do that. It's form over function, perhaps, or function over form. Not attractive. I get it. Sean, thank you very much. We have gone. I just looked at my watch. It has gotten a bit late for us, so I appreciate you sharing so much. You did say you had one last song, so what do you say? If people have further questions, they can certainly email them to me, and I'll share them with you. You'll share the slides, and I'll make them available to folks, and I'm not happy to forward any other questions that come in afterwards. But I would love to close the evening with a song, if you would be so kind.
Sure. And in fact, what I'll do the song, and I'll also do the dance piece, the international dance piece. So anyone who wants to hang around, I'll run through those. So I'm going to have to share the screen again and try to get back to where I was. Maybe this will get me there.
Yep, we're back on your classes page. We're getting there.
Let me see if this. Yeah. Well, in fact, here's the dancing first. Then I'll give the Galway Girl. So that's some sean-nós dancing. Sean-nós is just Irish for old style. As you can see there, you don't have to have any fancy dresses or any fancy hair or fancy shoes. So now I'm going to bring you to, let's see if I can find it, the Galway Girl. Let's see. I have to go back here. Yeah, so this is Sharon Shannon, and it was, again, I think it was done for the Guinness Book of Records to try to get the most people out to play and sing and dance to this one.
A stroll down the old long walk in the day. I met a little girl and we stopped to talk on a fine soft day. And I asked you, friend, what's a fella to do? Because her hair was black and her eyes were blue. And I knew right then I'd be taking a whirl down the Salthill Pond with a Galway girl. She asked me up to her flat downtown, fine soft day. And I asked you, friend, what's a fella to do? Because her hair was black and her eyes were blue. So I took her hand and then I gave it a twirl, and I lost my heart to a Galway girl. So when I woke up, I was all alone, with a broken heart and a ticket home. And I asked you, friends, oh, what would you do? Because her hair was black and her eyes were blue. She see, I traveled around, I've been all over the world. Boys, I've never seen nothing like a Galway girl. Last time.
So that was a great day in Galway. Steve Earle and a whole load of musicians. So if there's no more questions, I'll let you all go, and I'll head off and see if I can make a cup of tea.
Sean, thank you so much. There's been much appreciation across all the channels. So very appreciated. It's a great celebration of Ireland and so many beautiful things tonight. Thank you so much. I know I speak for many, many voices when we express our gratitude and appreciation. Thank you.
Okay, Clayton, thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks for all of you for staying. And if you want a copy, I'll send it to you, Clayton, and people. The only thing I would ask you to do, although Clayton generally looks over it for copyright, there's so many things I've thrown in there, and you never know if somebody said somewhere. So just use them for your own personal uses.
Nobody will be selling this. We have to make sure that we respect and support further Irish musicians. It's very important. So yes, we will do our best to protect. Thank you, Sean.
Okay, and then as I said, if anyone would like to find out more about my Irish history classes, try to find me somewhere.
Yes, if anybody is looking for you, they can certainly contact me. I'm ccheever@ocln.org. Very, very easy to find at the Thomas Crane Public Library, and I'd be happy to share your contact information with him, Sean. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a wonderful evening. Enjoy your tea.
I will do. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Good night.